Yes, Dublin South FM, bringing you great conversations that will help your business thrive. The pursuit of excellence. When I hear those words, it sparks passion within me, and I keep asking myself, how can I best serve you and my clients? Offering you the support to be and have that entrepreneurial mindset infused with a managerial skill set. I ask, what do you need us to talk about? What topics can we help you and your business to move forward? This week, I have Peter Winick. He is the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. For the last few decades, he has been helping individuals and organizations build and grow revenue streams through thought leadership. I'll be asking the questions: what is thought leadership? How can a company scale up, and how can they simplify the whole process? With a world that is becoming more uncertain, how do we keep our heads down and not get distracted with all the noise? Yes, Peter, and as you heard the intro there, welcome to Dublin South FM Radio.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
You know, I've sort of looked at some of your videos online. I've listened to some of your stuff on podcasts, and I've read a bit about what you do. And Peter, a couple of the things that really sort of resonated with myself. You know, I say to people, things are simple, but it's not easy. That everybody has great ideas, and everybody then wants to be the best as they can be in their own niche, but they find it extremely hard to know who is their customer, how do they best serve their customer as well. And I think if we all got that right, we wouldn't need anybody. We'd all be perfect in ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. I mean, I did a piece not that long ago asking folks to explain what they did and who they did it for, as if I was a 7-year-old. And they thought I was being snarky, which maybe was a bit snarky, but the point is, people do overcomplicate things. If you can't, I do X for Y, because even if you're a brain surgeon, right, what you do when you explain it to someone else isn't all that complicated. But I think the curse of the expert, or when you're too close to it, is to add layers and layers and layers and layers to it, as opposed to simplifying.
Do we all use these magic words? Everyone's sort of the new buzzword to get people hooked in. And what I say to a lot of my clients as well is if you're doing research, don't write an email to someone and ask them what their thoughts are, because people write differently to how they speak. And it won't
Very much so.
But if someone is talking to you, they'll express subconsciously what they're talking about. And you can use that information then to drive your message forward to potential clients as well. So do we use all these trickery buzzwords that are not necessary?
Well, I think there's a context piece to that. So in some arenas, the buzzwords or the jargon are industry specific, and it's a way of signaling, hey, I'm in the tribe. I'm one of you. I'm an actuary. I'm a medical professional. I'm a finance professional, whatever. So I think there's a little bit of trickery or signaling or whatever that goes on, or in some cases, an attempt to show respect, right? If I'm the outside consultant coming into work with you and I've done my homework, it's okay if I pick up some of the language and the jargon to signal that I've done my homework. Where it's not productive thing is when, someone overhearing that conversation, if you were having the conversation at a local restaurant or a cafe or something, walk by and would have no idea what you're talking about. Like, it's just so entrenched in gobbledygook that unless you're really, really deep there, you have no idea what is being communicated.
Like, I don't think my wife knows exactly what I do, No. One of the things as well, we talk about thought leadership. A lot of people will go, what is thought leadership? So as a man whose company is based around it, could you define it for us?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get asked that question often. So I'll give you my definition, which might not be the perfect definition, but let me just sort of go a half a step backwards. I think it's critical at the organizational level when you're investing in thought leadership and developing thought leadership, et cetera, inside your organization, that you establish a uniform definition. And we could debate which one is better, right, wrong, et cetera, because what happens is most folks don't really know what someone means when they talk about thought leadership. So if I'm not a finance professional, but Joe, you invited me to a meeting to talk about our balance sheet or our accounts receivable, I have an understanding of what the gist of the meeting is. If I'm not a marketer, if I'm not an expert, and someone invited me to a meeting on thought leadership, I have no idea what this meeting is going to be about. And I might be embarrassed not to even ask. So I think it's important to have a definition. Now I'll go back to your question and give you mine. So my definition that I've sort of played with a bit over the years is I think there's two components to thought leadership. So if you break it into thought, right, there's got to be thoughtfulness to it. Thoughtfulness comes from a couple of different places. And it's sort of, you don't need to be thoughtful in all of these areas, but it could be some combination thereof. It could be research. It could be academic research. It could be experience. It could be, real life application. It could be cross-disciplinary transfer of knowledge. So what is it that you're doing that is thoughtful, not just regurgitating sort of best practices or something, jargon you heard somewhere else or, the summary of another book, but what is it that is thoughtful that you're bringing to the table? That's number one. The second piece is, where do you have the courage to lead the dialogue, to lead the conversation, to lead the discipline in a little bit of a different direction, in a little bit of a new direction? And there's a fine line here. You don't want to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Everybody says the world is flat. You're going to say it's round, right? Or everybody says, these are best practices. And you say, no, these are best practices. That's being just annoying and irritating, just to be contrarian for the sake of riling things up. But what is the thoughtfulness that you're adding to the conversation? And by the way, that thoughtfulness doesn't need to be radical. It could be a little nuance. It could be a little addition to the discipline and the dialogue and an acknowledgement of those that came before you. So I think it's the combination of being thoughtful, because I don't have time to waste to hear somebody babble. I want somebody to bring something to my attention that's thoughtful, and I want to know where they're taking that conversation. So that's my definition.
The words that are springing up for myself is creative idea.
Yeah, it's a creative idea, but I think the potential downside of creative is a lot of people don't feel as if they are creative, because that leans itself towards the arts or whatever. There is a lot of creativity that goes into thought leadership, but it's more of an intellectual creativity. If you think about some of the greatest things out there today from a thought leadership perspective are really cross-disciplinary. It used to be 20 some odd years ago that psychology and economics were two totally, different fields. Now we have behavioral economics that recognizes that psychology is quirky. People do odd things that are irrational, illogical, not in their best interest. But economics says rational man. I've never met rational man or woman. It doesn't exist. It's a fallacy. Always operates with their best interests at heart. The reality is, in the real world, there's this tension between pure economics and the way people behave, which is behavioral economics. And it took a long, long time for those two disciplines to really play nicely together, which has given us more truer and better outcomes.
Yourself personally, Peter, what do you do on a day-to-day basis to have that sort of thought leadership and that creative mind so you can actually then deliver that to your own clients as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, my expertise and the firm's expertise isn't in the domain of creating thought leadership. Our clients come to us with ideas. Our clients come to us with deep expertise. They come to us with well thought out approaches, or at least the sort of blueprints of what will be. Our creativity, I believe, comes in developing the strategies and helping people figure out how to scale, how to leverage, how to monetize, and how to have the most impact through their thought leadership, either for impact or for income or whatever their goals are. So there's an equal amount, if not greater amount, of creativity on that side of the house than there is on the other side of the house, which is the creation of the ideas. And to me, it's the blending of the two, right? Because today, to really be a successful thought leader, however you choose to define that, if you write down all of the skills that would require, understanding marketing, understanding social media, understanding communication, understanding, the business side of the house, sales, marketing, distribution, et cetera. It's very, very rare that somebody's going to have all of those skills at a high enough level to achieve an outcome that's notable.
The three things that 30 years in business, myself personally, I have realized that there's three elements that make any business successful. You have the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur is thinking that will risk everything because they have the passion inside that'll drive it. And then you have the managerial who looks at business, uses an education format to get the business moving and won't take that risk because he's getting paid away. If you can amalgamate the two of them together, the process that I've seen or I've learned is that it's mindset, it's systems and processes.
Yeah,
and
I think that's right.
Those three elements, if you get them right and bring in expertise like yourself, amazing things can happen within the organization.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Joe, is it seems a bit counterintuitive, but from my experience, adding constraints actually increases the productivity of most thought leaders, because staring at a blank canvas or blank piece of paper or a blank business plan or whatever is the scariest, hardest thing in the world. But if we put some constraints on it, now a constraint might be any thought leadership that you're going to create is going to be applicable to these avatars, because these are the people that you're serving that have these problems. So now we've layered two dimensions, the who and the what. And people say, oh my God, you've added all these constraints. And it's like, it's actually freeing to have those constraints as opposed to being, too scattered or too broad or too unfocused.
Our own journey and our own wisdom helps us walk the talk or walk the walk for other people. What was yours? We all have a life story and a journey. What was yours to get you where you are now, that you had that ha-ha moment?
It's ongoing. So I'm not in a box yet. So the journey happens every day. To me, the aha moment or epiphany or whatever, you call it what you will, the lightning bolt was, there were always two sides to how I operated that were, I thought, just totally two different sides to a coin, two unrelated parts of Peter, if you will. Number one, entrepreneurial. So I started my first, real business. I was 22 years old. This is like in the 1800s and before electricity and all that. Starting businesses, growing businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was always really passionate content or thought leadership. Now, in those days, those might have been the words we heard. Here's someone within a book or always reading or always researching or whatever. And I never once thought about, in a book that I bought and read or an article by someone that I admired in a respectable journal, how does that person make a living? What's their business model? I had no reason to ever think that, nor would anybody else. You buy a book, you read the book, you go, that's an interesting book, whatever. And then about 20 years ago, I was brought in to do a turnaround at a communications consulting firm. And the firm's intellectual property was really based on a book that was done in the late 1960s. So at that point, it was 30, 40 years old. And I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. I can apply my entrepreneurial passion against my nerdy skills in a business environment. This is really, really cool. And there's been several iterations of that, but that's ultimately, what I and the team do every day today is apply the creativity of an entrepreneur, specifically and very laser focused on a thought leadership business. There's a lot of things that we just don't do, won't do, whatever. We stay in our lane because we know that the more focused we are and the more we say no, the better are to those that we say yes to. The better we are to those folks.
I think a lot of people try to be everything to all. And if they actually get into niching, it actually then it's, look, get me Peter, get me Joe, get me whoever, because when you're niching. One of the things that I've learned from speaking to a lot of CEOs and a lot of management in quite a large companies, they feel very isolated. They feel that everybody is looking to them for the answers. When you come in, do you acknowledge that as well? And do you become a counselor? Probably counselor is the wrong word.
Well, yeah, our clients tend to be literally world-class in what they do. I mean, almost all of our clients are brilliant on some dimension. But we have to develop the rapport and the trust and have the integrity to look them in the eye and say, that's stupid. The reason you're not achieving the success that you deserve to achieve is you're self-sabotaging, or the idea that you're thinking about investing in is a really bad idea. And let me show you 5 reasons why. So I'm not serving my client if I can't look them in the eye and say, listen, your, redheaded, cross-eyed, big-eared, freckled kid is not going to be a model. I'm sorry to break the news to you, but let's be honest. This is the profile of what a beautiful child looks like. Yours is beautiful in a different way, but let's not go down this model path. So let's be honest here.
I've seen that actually in a radio ad where someone had brought in their own children and it was cringing. But
the other thing is there's an isolation. So when you're a thought leader, when you think about what is the typical infrastructure or day or month in the life of a thought leader look like? They tend to be pretty isolated, working alone. They tend to be a little more introverted, even though they may show as extroverts when they're speaking and stuff. And, a lot of the work they do is they get up on stage, they speak for an hour, and it ends in a standing ovation. Yeah, that's lovely, but it gets to, it affects your head a little bit, right? A mechanic that works hard all day on your car doesn't go home to a standing ovation. Like, that doesn't happen. Goes home with, dirty fingernails and tired and wants to have a beer, right?
That's the last 2 years as well. I think a lot of business have changed and a lot of people have changed. Like the last two shows, we really spoke about sales and how sales has changed. What I've found personally over the last 2 years, I'm happy in my own solitude, but I'm actually now comfortable in my own little pod. I don't know if I'm institutionalized or not, but that creativity then comes out when I speak to people like yourself, or I'm working with a client and they might say something and I have that aha moment, and you'll bring it to them and they'll go, oh, I never thought of that. Do you ever get that as well? And you go, why can't people see the obvious sometimes?
Yeah, I think we're all really bad at seeing the obvious in ourselves. Right. So, I've had clients and I said, okay, let's just do an exercise. And I write up like a very limited, couple of bullet points of a case study. How would you respond to that? And it's them, and they give the right answer. Right. But to themselves, either they're procrastinating or they've got, imposter syndrome or whatever. I'm like, would you talk to your, a client like that, the way you yourself talk? So I think there is a lot of that. I think that we need to figure out how to serve ourselves better and be objective. Now, the other side of that is delusional, right? Like,
yeah, well,
you don't want to go there.
But I think that's the issue. I think everybody is self-sabotage. I think being authentic is the big thing, and people asking what is their purpose and all. But I think with an organization, once they get clarity on what they do and who they serve, I see miracles happening within an organization when they get very clear on their purpose. They're clear on their message.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to be all things to all people, there's not enough depth for you to have any connectivity with anyone, right? It's too superficial. It's too light. When you have a deep domain expertise and with a high level of certainty based on experience that these are the type of problems that I am better than anybody else to solve for these type of people in this context. And then somebody might say, well, problem's sort of like that. And then they sort of unpack it and it's really 3 concentric circles away from it. You have to have the courage to say, I might be somewhat helpful, but that's not where I'm at my best. Can I use a hammer to screw in a screw? You can, but there's another tool called a screwdriver that's better suited to do that. And I think that's really, you have to be honest enough with yourself and with your clients and prospects to do that.
What about fakeness? Fake it till you make it. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I don't really agree with that. Certain things you push yourself out of your comfort zone, whatever. But if you're really, really faking something, people can smell through that. We all know when you go back to flow and being in the zone, when you're in the zone, you know it. And when you have the privilege of working with someone that's in the zone, you know it.
For me, the zone is, helping them people with their branding and with their sales and seeing stuff the way the company can flow. And you get into that and you could sit down and you could work 48 hours without any sleep working on something when you're in that zone.
One of the ways that I spot check that, and I encourage my team to do so, is, you get up in the morning, you're preparing for your day, you're looking at your phone, what are the calls you have, what do you got scheduled on? If there's someone's name, a client or whatever, that's on your calendar and every time you see it, you're cringing, something's off. I feel totally fortunate and blessed that I'm at a point in my life and in my career where I don't need to work with people that drive me nuts. And listen, I drive plenty of people nuts too. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I love when I look at my calendar every day, even if it's a really busy, I don't care if I work 10, 12 hours a day, but that I'm actually looking forward to every interaction for one reason or another. I can help them. I'm learning from them. They're learning from me. Like, that's really cool. It's when you see, like, and we all know who those people are on your calendar, like, oh, geez, at 3:00, I got, your whole day is stressed out for this half an hour interaction.
We try and avoid them ourselves as well. We try our best to avoid them. But you do get to a point when you choose who you want to work with. And, if you do take on someone that you're taking it on for the money, you're actually then start to become an employee for them, and that can go a whole different direction as well on it. The one thing I want to ask you as well, uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty going on in the world at the moment. How are you adapting that to that? Or are you like most, what I'm telling my clients, don't look at it, don't get involved in it too deep, because you can get pulled into a lot of the nonsense. What are you finding about the uncertainty? And are companies out there quite nervous, and are they restructuring themselves as well?
So I think there's always been uncertainty, period, right? I think that we're living in an age where there has been more uncertainty simultaneously, consistently for a very long period of time than ever before. It was easier for a lot of organizations to be in denial of the uncertainty because it would pop up here and again. But now it's this constant state of uncertainty. So I look at uncertainty a little bit differently and say, okay, so if we're living in a world of sort of constant flux or uncertainty or et cetera, what's the opportunity there? And what are the things I need to do different? And am I using an old paradigm to solve a new problem? So for example, right now we're living in, it's the great resignation. It's this hybrid workforce. It's this remote piece. I believe that in whatever, 20 or 30 years or whatever, our kids or grandkids are going to look back and say, wait a minute, you got on a train or in a car every day and traveled 3 hours round trip to sit in an office to ignore the people around you. That was called work. Who thought this was smart? And you weren't in a factory or, aware, like, and you're like, well, everybody else did it. This is just the way it was done. This is the way we did it, In the
next 100 years, people will laugh that we had a white line in the middle of the road that separated cars that were doing 100 miles an hour.
Right.
In other words, it was a bit of paint.
Yeah, right. A little bit of paint was going to protect you. Right.
Yeah, and that's how we lived our lives. Dangerously, that was dangerous then. But like with uncertainty as well, I can remember the Gulf War. I can remember the Falklands War we had down in the Balkans. Even I spoke to people that it was the Falkland Wars, which was back in the 80s. And I can even remember as a child in the 70s where we used to have to queue up for petrol. But there was companies and there was organizations that still thrived in those situations because the people in it were innovative and they didn't get distracted from the noise.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we have the tools that we have and the speed at which we can process and deal with and manage uncertainty today is far greater. I mean, one of the things that I thought about a lot early in COVID, which is like, 2+ years ago now, is could you imagine if we didn't have Zoom, the productivity? Could you imagine if we were still dealing with dial-up internet? And these are not stable technologies that have been around 30 years, right? But like, internet at home, even 15 years ago, was not consistent, was not stable, didn't have the bandwidth. Before Zoom, there were all these before Zoom, video-based conferencing that were just different flavors of horrible and awful. What that would have done for productivity and connectivity and all that other things. I mean, we were very lucky in that sense.
If I go to meet someone and they want to meet me, it's 35 minutes of me wasting my time into the city, and it's 35 minutes of me wasting my time out of the city, where I can jump on a Zoom, have a call, we can get more done, and I've saved myself an hour.
Well, but I think that's about questioning things a little bit more. So it used to be, that was pretty standard. Hey, let's meet for a coffee. Great. You get in the car, blah, 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 blah. And the coffee that might've been a half an hour, that might've yielded nothing. It's what we all did. So it doesn't mean that we don't do face-to-face and we don't do coffee anymore, but we're going to screen that a little bit more. Right. And so, what, first step is let's just jump on a Zoom and have a conversation. Right. And I think there are places, and I think this is where the hybrid workforce is going to go. If I'm going to go in the office a day, a month, a day, a week, whatever that cadence is going to be, I should make sure that I'm doing the things in an office that I can't do as well at home, that I'm going to sit down face-to-face and problem solve with you. I'm going to take someone to lunch. I'm going to get a bunch of people in a room and interact and brainstorm, whatever the things that are better, because this type of communication, exchanging information, meeting, et cetera, is really, really good. But there are things that are still missing, that are not the same as being in person. And we've done our best to adopt.
I would agree with you, because you could have a different conversation with someone through Zoom and build that relationship. If you met that person over coffee, it would be a different synergy and it mightn't work as well. Now, for myself, I was using Zoom through business well before COVID kicked in. I was dealing with people in America and Europe. I think the dynamics is changing in such a way that it's coming more positive as well for people on it.
Yeah, I think everybody's comfortable with it. And I think that it's interesting. So, if you go back, I don't know, whatever, 5 years, most of my calls were conference calls, right? So you're sitting on the phone, or on your headset or whatever, talking. And we thought that was really good. There's a level of connection when you have that visual on a Zoom that, there's discussions of Zoom fatigue and tired, but it's a more rich dialogue. And I find now, maybe it's once every 3-4 days, I'm having a call that's not Zoom on the phone. I feel like it's lacking. Like it's like watching black and white television or something like that. It's missing an element. And I'm wondering, is that person really concentrating? Are they doing their emails? Are they, whatever?
Are they dressed?
Yeah, right.
Tell me, you talk about thought leaderships, and you mentioned about platforms as well. When we looked on LinkedIn, what advice would you give to someone who feels they are a thought leader and they want to grow their business?
Initially, the way the business was started 14 years ago was with working with individual authors, thought leaders, academics, consultants, C-level executives, et cetera, people that create and produce thought leadership. And the thought leadership is the product per se. So someone does some research, they write a book, they go out there and speak, consult, advise, create capabilities development solutions that are derivatives of the book. That was the traditional business. That's still a very, very big piece of our business. However, we expanded the operation actually right before, almost days before COVID started. And we have another practice area that we call the organizational thought leader. And in that line of the business, we're working with very, very large organizations, global organizations that need to get thought leadership out in a very specific way to the communities that matter most to them to stay connected. So it's not the product. Think high tech, think professional services, think financial services, think global nonprofits. They need to get the ideas out to the communities that matter because it's expected of them. So for example, Deloitte Human Resources Consulting, if they're not putting things out right now on Great Resignation and managing a workforce from remotely and all that, their clients and those that might potentially be clients would suspect something's not right. They expect to get high quality, credible thought leadership from those type of organizations around those type of issues. They're not expecting marriage advice or cooking instructions. They're very specific piece there. Platform is really the overarching, the way we think about it is I call it solve for X. Joe is the X guy. What is that X? What is it that these type of people, organizations, companies, entities, whatever, come to you to solve these types of problems? So it's rare that the platform is a book title. A book fits under the platform. So, the gist of your question is really, what is the starting point for a thought leader? What is the most important thing? And I find, and I might be biased, right, that it's about the strategy, because what I find is thought leaders are passionate about what they do. They're in flow. They're in the zone, like we talked about. They're type A. They're hardworking, but, and this is a big but, they tend to confuse activity with productivity. And the reason they do that is they don't have a strategy. Well, why don't they have a strategy? Well, Joe, if you and I decided we're going to open a line of shopping malls in Europe, we're going to say, okay, that's a good business. Let's go do that. Well, we don't have the funds to do that. So we're going to have to get investors. So those investors are going to hold us accountable and say, what's the strategy? What's the plan? Is this going to be high-end retail? Is it going to be mixed use? Whatever is it, where are they going to be located? Urban areas, rural areas, whatever. When you're a thought leader, you're not held accountable to anyone, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And there's some accounting that they do intellectually that's somewhat fraudulent, meaning, I'm not spending a lot of money on this. Okay, well, what's a year of your life worth going down the wrong path? I think that's worth a lot in terms of opportunity cost. So I think when you have strategy, you have clarity. And when you have clarity, you can prioritize all the tactical things that can suck up your time.
But I think that's the problem. I think a lot of people go and build tactical things before they actually look at the strategy. And then they're kind of scratching their head. Why is it not working? Why are we slowing down? Where if you look at the strategy, then you can build tactical, and tactical can be whatever it is. Lived in Germany for a very long time, and I've worked in America as well and in England, and I've seen the difference between different cultures and how they operate. And once you understand all that, then you can actually swap stuff from different cultures to bring it into an organization to make it grow, which is, again, as I said, mindset, systems and processes as well.
Well, I think it's partly cultural, but I also think it's contextual. There's a time to be agile and there's a time to be structured, right? There's a time to, no one's ever solved this problem before, so we just might as well dive in, right? There's ready, fire, aim, and there's ready, aim, fire. And there's a time and place for both, I think. And I think there are cultural tendencies, but you don't want those to become sort of self-fulfilling prophecies or excuses of why we do things the way we do.
It's learning to adapt.
Exactly. I think that's right. So I think, strategy is important. Strategy is really important for thought leaders because it helps you get from A to B more effectively, more efficiently. And, most thought leaders actually, yes, there's a financial piece to this. They want to make money. They want to better themselves, et cetera. But they also want to have impact on the world. And they want to unleash the power of their ideas on those that can be impacted and affected the most.
Where can people find you if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn or your company and want to use your services? What's the one tip or the one piece of advice that you would give to someone who believes they are a thought leader?
Yeah, so you could find, my website is thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. You could email me directly at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. What's the one tip I'd give a thought leader? Well, the first tip I would say is don't call yourself a thought leader. It's a horrible thing to say. It's actually I find when someone calls someone else a thought leader out of respect, admiration, et cetera, that's true. People that call themselves thought leaders, I cringe at that. But I think if you desire to be a thought leader, and if you have, passions around that, study others that have done it, get some help, do a competitive analysis, even if it's not in your own space. You're not the first one to solve this puzzle, and be open-minded enough to learn from folks, even if they come from different domains, of how did that person that's really a successful thought leader get to be where they are? Because everybody looks at some of these rock stars and say, I want to be them. I'm like, okay, well, did you figure out how they got to be where they are? And yes, there's always some luck involved and all these other things, but I think there are patterns that you can look at and say, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to replicate some of that.
Peter, great talking to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.